Welcome to From the VC's Bookshelf, a podcast from TBR, the College System of Tennessee, the state's largest higher education system. In this series, we examine how we might re-envision the work we do and how we work together as we move into a post-pandemic world. Please join our host, Dr. Heidi Lemming, Vice Chancellor for Student Success, as she leads a live discussion with industry experts and leaders throughout our system.
In our Spring 2025 podcast series, we are focusing on themes found in the book Creating Campus Community in Search of Ernest Boyer's Legacy by William McDonald and Associates. The book was released in 2002, but the relevance of the topic is more important than ever for our students and institutions. Belonging asks, does everyone on campus feel valued, connected, and able to be their authentic selves? In many ways, belonging is the emotional counterpart to inclusion. It is the feeling of having personal involvement in an environment. A sense of belonging is centered on gaining acceptance, being part of something, and feeling supported as well as giving support to others. Like inclusion, a sense of belonging is active and requires reflection. Thriving institutions create spaces to foster social connections and communication that in turn nurture creativity, innovation, and success. In today's podcast, I'm excited to be talking to both Amie Nephew, who works as the Director of Accessibility for the Tennessee Board of Regents, and Charity Davenport, who is an Instructional Technology Specialist for Accessibility at Pellissippi State Community College in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm going to do a little bit of a bio here on both of our panelists today. Amie, as I mentioned, is the Director of Accessibility for the Tennessee Board of Regents. She has an emphasis on training and compliance for the system. She contributes to creating inclusive environments for all learners. In her role, she helps content managers learn best practices for digital accessibility, facilitates training programs and workshops, and assists in monitoring institutional compliance. She also evaluates websites and social media platforms to help ensure they meet accessibility standards. Amie holds a Master's of Education in Instructional Design, which has provided a strong foundation for her work in creating accessible learning experiences. She's also a certified professional in accessibility core competencies through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, reflecting her ongoing commitment to improving accessibility. With a strong belief in equal access for all, Amie is passionate about advocating for accessibility initiatives and working with others to promote a culture of inclusion in education across Tennessee. Welcome, Amie.
Thank you for having me.
And our second panelist is Charity Davenport, again, an Instructional Technology Specialist for Accessibility at Pellissippi State Community College in Knoxville. She was recently awarded Pellissippi's Staff SOAR Award. In her role at Pellissippi, she supports and trains faculty on how to make course content accessible and other technology tool trainings. She is the author of an OER textbook for advanced ESL students called It's All Greek to Me. And before coming to Pellissippi State, she was an ESL instructor for 13 years at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Her areas of interest are open educational resources, open pedagogy, accessibility, universal design for learning, generative AI, online course design, and online teaching and learning best practices. Welcome, Charity.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's do a brief recap of the themes found in the book. It's based on a theory of engagement by Ernest Boyer. And in Creating Campus Community in Search of Ernest Boyer's Legacy, authors from 5 diverse institutions share their successes, failures, and ongoing challenges in establishing a capacity for connectedness. In summary, Boyer felt that a college should include 6 key components. The first, be educationally purposeful, where learning is the focus. Second, an open place where civility is affirmed. Third, a just place where persons are honored. Fourth, a disciplined place where group obligation guide behavior. 5, a caring place where individuals are supported and service is encouraged. And 6, a celebrative place where traditions are shared. So the term sense of belonging may feel intangible, but it essentially describes how people feel when they are in a place that they feel they're meant to be and with people they are meant to be with. So it feels good. If students arrive on campus and they feel they do not belong, disengagement, disconnection, and discomfort ensue. So when we think about reflecting on this concept of sense of belonging, I'd like to hear from your lens in the work that you do. We talked a little bit about your background in your bio. How would you see your work affecting a student's sense of belonging on campus?
So I think one thing about me, and even though my role is a lot in the digital accessibility side, you may have heard in my bio, I was an ESL instructor. So a lot of my teaching was for international students and involving culture. I'm really big into open educational resources. So I really look at like financial accessibility as part of this. So I think accessibility broadly, we need to give access to students to learn, but they need to know that it's more than just access. It's okay, now you're here, you have your course materials, you're in Brightspace, but how can I help you be successful? How can I help you be successful with your classmates, work with your classmates, make friends on campus? Because it's exactly like you said, if students don't feel like they belong, if they're like, why am I here? That's definitely going to affect their success in the classroom. And so, especially what I do with digital accessibility, I try as much as I can to promote this idea of accessibility for all, because it's not just something for faculty to think about when they get a student with an accommodation. It's for every single one of their students. They're going to have students in their classroom who have a disability but have not disclosed with disability services. They're going to have students in their classrooms that maybe don't know that they have a disability. They're not diagnosed. They don't have the financial or time capability or know-how to get diagnosed. There's a lot of invisible disabilities. And then there's also, the international students in their classroom and first-generation students, veteran students. Everything with accessibility is really going to help them know that this is the place they can be, because the course is designed in a way that helps everyone succeed, no matter what kind of situation they're in.
Right. That's great.
And I think what's important to note there is it's important to have these equal opportunities for both the academic and the extracurricular activities. So when students can easily access the content and the tools, they're better able to engage in their learning and campus life. So they're able to go to events, whether they're virtual or in person, because they are equipped with the tools.
Can you talk a little bit more about what digital accessibility is, Amie? Because I think that would be important for some of our listeners who maybe are not familiar with that.
Sure. So digital accessibility as a whole, it focuses on anything that is online, whether that's social media or flyers or course content or programs that we use across the institutions, whether it be admissions or business office. All of those are all included in that. So when students have access to those with their assistive technology, or as Charity pointed out, students who may not have a disability through the disabilities office, but have issues with hearing or sight, that they need captions or assistive technology to allow them to access the content, it makes it available to them so that they are able to access the same content as if they were reading the flyer themselves, or the course content videos that are made available through their courses.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I sometimes hear when I'm out in the community, people are thinking of a community college or a technical college student as one that just comes in, takes classes, and goes home, maybe isn't as interested in having a sense of community on campus. And so there's kind of this opinion that that's why they come to us, right? Is they're not necessarily interested in that. How authentic do you think students' desires to be connected are, just in what you've seen in your role? And are they simply expecting to remain dependent on those in authority to take care of them, or are they actually wanting some of that independence?
I've seen a little bit of a mix of both. So 2 years ago, I taught our College Success College 1000 course, which is like our first semester type of studies. And I remember one of the questions being, how do I make friends? And that really struck me. And so I said, from someone that's an introvert, I thought about like, how did I make friends in college? And I just went to events. If you go places, if you're, going to things, somebody's going to, connect with you. It's not as hard as you think. And I think that really encouraged that student that it's not as hard as maybe they think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really glad that at Pellissippi, we do have a mixture of like clubs and organizations that meet in person, but also meet online,
Mm-hmm.
because that's also really important, especially if you have online students. That's a big thing, is like, okay, they're online. How can we build this community? How can we make them, feel part of, this community college if they're online? But on the other hand, I did have a student this semester in my College 1000 that said we had like a required, like you need to go to certain events on campus as part of your like capstone portfolio. And he said, I work full time. I don't really have much time to, hang out and do things on campus. So then at least for my College 1000, what I did is I built it into the class time to make kind of an engagement event. And so that might be something that, faculty could think about doing, is building in that sense of community in the classroom to help mitigate when, students don't have it in their schedule to do that.
Yeah.
I agree. And humans are social beings, right? And students desire to connect when they feel safe. And part of that is speaking on students with disabilities. If they have to work harder to get the content to even be able to attend events, it's going to make it more difficult for them to participate in the events. And in turn, they won't feel safe enough to open up and connect with other people.
Yeah. And I think that's the importance of the work that you're doing. It's really about giving them a sense that they do belong on campus and can contribute and participate at the same level as other students. In Chapter 5 of this book, the author describes a campus example of how campus leadership can develop a sense of what he calls Boyer-inspired collaboration on campus. Since students spend more time out of the classroom, we've been talking about the importance of that. The chapter describes how it's important to connect, to those experiences to build that sense of community. So just want to, hear some examples from you about how you've seen that work well in your work. If you've seen something not work well, I think that's also really important to kind of hear, what are your suggestions for others on like how departments at a school could connect to even the work that you're doing?
I think a good example was one of the student organizations that I found out about is there is like an autistic student group that meet online and talk. And I was just really glad that, students could have that sense of, feeling like, okay, here's a group I can talk to. Here's a lot of people who are like me that I can talk to. And it is that same thing of if they feel like they belong with this group, that can help them branch out and feel like they belong to, the whole community.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And working with different areas across the institution, so collaborating between faculty and student service people to make sure that the websites, the digital signage, online student portals, social media platforms are all accessible to the students, as well as integrating accessibility into campus-wide events, not just academics, but also all of the social aspects of it. I think that's important.
Yeah. And, one of the things, of course, you're on a campus, you're working with faculty. You haven't necessarily worked with every faculty, right? Because sometimes they only come to you when they have a student with an accommodation that needs to be met. But can you think about ways that maybe, other faculty who, it's just important for us to be accessible up front, could engage with your department and the work that you're doing, what you would say to them to encourage them to think about that?
I think that's kind of my whole training campaign is, I even have like little stickers and little pins that say accessibility for all. And that's always been like every time that I have training, I always begin it with why. Why is this important? Why are we doing this? How does this, affect your students? Because they need that buy-in. I think a lot of times faculty think like, well, it is part of the law, but I'm not going to have a blind student in my class, or I'm not really going to have an accommodation letter. And so I try to extend that by saying, these are really cool things that all of your students can benefit from and make your whole course better for all of them. And it is kind of the thing of like, if a student has an accommodation, it does maybe feel like to them and the faculty that they're getting like special treatment. And by focusing on accessibility for all, it's helping everyone in the classroom. And then that can also help that student with an accommodation feel like, oh, I'm not getting special treatment. We're all in this together and we're all benefiting from these accessibility standards.
And that's really kind of at the heart, Amie, of what you're doing across the system, while you're not at just like one campus any longer, just doing this work. So how are you thinking about that in terms of how you encourage folks across the system to kind of get bought into, in some places they know universal design for learning, for example, but this concept of out the gate, everyone can benefit from this work?
Yeah, so some of the most favorite examples that come to mind are, closed captionings on videos. So many people use them. You don't have to have a disability to use closed captioning. And there was a story where a woman who was working 2 jobs and had 3 kids and was going to night classes, working hard. And there was no way that she could have time to sit and watch all of these videos. She actually had it transcribed, which is easy to do and very accessible. And it made it easy for her to be able to skim through it and note all the important things. And it took notes for her, so she didn't have to actually take those notes. But it benefited her from having to, or not having to have an hour to watch a video when she didn't have an hour in her outside time. Other things are when you're in loud places, whether you're on like a train or an Uber and you have a long drive, and you can watch your video with the closed captions and not have to have the volume up. And so there are several different aspects to this. One of my favorites is when a student who had disabilities and was really struggling in one of their classes and went to a disability service, and they found out that there was issues with the course not being accessible. And they sent the faculty to me. And when we were talking about it, and Charity already stated the why. Why is this important? And the faculty member started to say, well, goodness, I didn't know it was going to be this hard before creating it. And so we had a valid discussion about how hard it would be for the student, how hard that student is working towards this. And it was like a light bulb. That faculty member was like, oh my goodness, you're right. Because when we expect students to jump through hoops that other students don't have to jump through.
Right.
And they have to work so much harder. And I think a lot of faculty and staff don't realize that these students who need accessibility, they're already jumping through all the hoops. They're already doing all of the things. And so having our content accessible for them and everyone else that uses it is not giving special treatment. It's doing what's right and equitable.
Yeah, trying to level the playing field a little bit.
Right.
And your role for our listeners is new at the system office. And it's really in a desire, because we know that the work can be challenging in certain fields, for faculty. And so you're there to assist them. Can you talk a little bit about what your role is in that space?
Yeah, so one of my biggest things is connecting with faculty and staff to make sure that their content is accessible and what it means to be accessible. So bringing the awareness to accessibility and making sure they have the tools provided or needed that will allow their course content to be accessible. So I do a lot of trainings. I do institution-wide or system-wide trainings to make sure that we are reaching all of the different areas in the institution, not just academic, but also with our software purchases, our student success flyers, and website designs. So it's a what I like to call a group project. Everybody has a part.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the approach that we take here. And I'm here as a resource. I've been doing digital accessibility for 7 years now, and I'm really passionate about it. I started out as being a high school teacher, and we had a lot of turning over to online systems, and nobody was thinking about the students who had disabilities and having access to these products that were great products, but they didn't know how to use them with their assistive technology. So that's where my passion came from. I needed to make sure that they were able to reach the same content as everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so it all bases off of that, making sure our students have what they need to have an equal playing field.
Well, and more technology is being used in the classroom. So, this generative AI conversation that everybody's weighing in on right now, just kind of curious because that, is a technology that we're trying to embrace. I think faculty are trying to embrace because there are certainly benefits of that. Can you talk about how that impacts maybe the accessibility work?
Yeah, so I think I'm a fan of AI when it's used correctly. Mm-hmm. I'm a fan of it because it does allow faculty and staff to say, oh, well, how do I make this accessible? And AI will give them a lot of really great tips to do. Charity, you do a lot of work with AI, so would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, like you had mentioned before, something about that student using a software that could, you put a transcript in and it can make some notes for you.
Mm-hmm.
There are dedicated AI products like that are specifically for students with disabilities, especially like ADHD and autism that have been, we've been using and piloting at Pellissippi, and it's been very popular with students. I know that probably sounds scary to a lot of faculty, but I've used things similar to that myself, like doing research. And it's like, I can't read this 60-page paper, to work on, this grant proposal or something. Can something summarize it for me or pick out some of the main points? And that is very helpful. And especially someone who's had some difficulty reading when I was in school, just the ability to have, a kind of another thing talking to me that's saying, yes, here are some of the main ideas and here are things to focus on while you're reading, I think is especially helpful for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And I really like this idea of, again, technology and how it impacts the way that our communities are formed and maintained. What other things maybe would you want to highlight about how technology can assist with that?
So I believe that technology facilitates instant communication and offers platforms where people with similar interests and backgrounds can come together regardless of geographical boundaries. So whether it be, I believe, Charity, you brought up the autism group that meets virtually. That's coming up more and more. And one of the things that the pandemic actually showed, while devastating in many ways, it did bring about positive change for people with disabilities in terms of education and employment. Mm-hmm. So the unemployment rate for people with disabilities went down during the pandemic, which is one of the only groups that went down for, as well as the education enrollment went up. And that was because everything got thrown online.
Mm-hmm.
So people who were reliant on other people doing things for them, whether it's bringing them to the store. They can now order their groceries online through the technology that was provided if it was accessible. And that's the same process if they were not able to go to in-person classes. And that was a case. I met a student out in the community where they had mobile disabilities, and they were not able to go to a class, 4 or 5 days a week, and they were not able to get there. But they were able to do online classes through the community college. And with the power of AI or the different assistive technologies and making sure our content is accessible, the student graduated. I mean, they have a whole career now and are able to do that through the advancements in technology.
That's great. I love those stories. In chapter 6, the authors also talk about the importance of building community partnerships, those, that work outside of your institutions, to also build a sense of civic responsibility in students. So this sense of building a sense of community isn't just about our campuses. It's how we educate students on developing a sense of well-being in their lives outside of campus. How do you see the work that you're doing around accessibility maybe playing out in the greater communities that you're in and not just the campus community? And it might be through how you're working with students and faculty and how they might go out into the community with that information, but would like to hear, how your work might influence a larger community.
I think for me, the best example I can think of is we have something called SEP. I think it's the Student Employment Program at Pellissippi, where we hire student workers.
Mm-hmm.
And so we hired a couple of student workers for our department to do some captioning, but also accessibility, help in general. And so I was teaching her different things about accessibility, how to caption, why captions are important. And it kind of like, it's the awareness thing of like, oh, I never really thought about how impactful these things are.
Mm-hmm.
Like how accessibility is important for everyone. And she said, when I go to church now, and my uncle is in charge of, the live streaming for our services, and now I make sure that we have live captions.
That's great.
Because we have a lot of older people watching the live stream that, the captions would be really helpful for them. So I feel glad that through the students, I'm seeing more of a push of support for accessibility and the awareness and helping carry that forth.
Yeah. I mean, that really highlights the importance of students coming to our campuses to get an education. It's not just about the courses that they're taking, but the greater education of how you can contribute, learn about others, and take that with you out into the world.
It's the aha moment. It's like, wow, this is really simple, and it can impact so many people. It could be a total change from someone who is not able to leave their home to someone who has an active career, or being able to go to the church service and see the live captions or order their groceries online. And I love that I'll talk about accessibility to anybody and everybody. They're like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, let me tell you. And when you see it click in that person, it's like, wow, that is super simple. Then they bring it places. I had a coworker who had gone through some of my training and then went on to expand their career and for the city, and brought those with her to the city and said, oh no, we have to do it like this so we reach everybody, because 1 in 3 people in our community have a disability, and that's important. That's a lot of people.
Right.
And so seeing it get spread I think it's just the coolest.
Well, and that's really the neat part about our technical and community colleges, is that while we're here to help the individual, we're also there to help the community, whether it's training for jobs that are in our community or simply providing some knowledge that then gets carried out into the community, right? And makes a difference in the lives of others.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is really cool about this work. So, well, as we wrap up our conversation today, I do want to share a quote from author Parker Palmer. He's known for a lot of really good thought-provoking conversations. He states, "We have at our disposal one of the greatest vehicles for community building known to humankind, the one called education. While elusive at times, a sense of belonging is a serious responsibility and an aspiration that all higher education professionals should aspire to achieve." And I think that really resonates well with the conversation we've had today, that the work that we do in education is so important on so many levels, but also in raising awareness to people about how inclusive practices in the classroom and through digital technologies can really embrace this sense of connecting people to the work that we do and making them feel supported and included. So thank you again for sitting with me today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this edition of From the VC's Bookshelf, brought to you by TBR, the College System of Tennessee, powering the state's economy and changing the lives of thousands of graduates, starting successful careers each year. To learn more about upcoming book selections or to register to attend discussions live, visit tbr.edu/bookshelf.